we keep seeing new architectures, new models, new techniques. So many of our students are very confused that whether there is actually important to learn classical ML algorithms now, or we can directly shift towards deep learning or advanced machine learning techniques.
Yeah. So I actually, yeah, we always have to be careful. It's always a mistake to, it's very easy to fall into this trap that the old stuff, classical stuff is important. But I actually do think it is. Maybe not everything. But ultimately, when you think about deep learning, um, it is, first of all, it's built out of the building blocks of classical machine learning. I mean, if you look inside of deep learning, it's just, a neural network, it's a logistic function, as, it's all the same tools. And one thing that's very important is to understand that none of this is God given. Like if you just learn this, if you now just learn deep learning, right? There's this, I think, this mistake of, oh, this is how they have to be, right? This is, or the transition function has to be a ReLU or something, or
Hmm.
and there has to be an MLP, and there's an attention layer, and then there's an MLP. Attention layer has to be this inner product based stuff. No, not at all, right? It can be totally different, right? And it could be different building blocks, and we have to make sure that we don't corner ourselves into a very, very specific way that algorithms work, right? And actually, that's the mistake a little bit that we've gone through that mistake, right? In the 2000s, there was a time when basically everything was SVMs. Support vector machines were everywhere, and machine learning became this thing. Machine learning is almost equivalent to optimization, right? You just formulate an optimization problem and then you do a solver, and it has to be convex and has to have constraints. You just write down all these exact specifications of the optimization problem, and then you solve it. And then deep learning came along and just blasted that wide open. And I think that's in part because people did not forget the old stuff, which was neural networks, right? And basically gave it a second chance, tried it, right? And had never, actually, some people had never given up on it. And I think we have to make sure that we don't repeat that mistake. Back then, that was the same thing. Like, should we even cover neural networks in class, right? Like, it's so outdated. Nobody uses them anymore. Is this worth it, right? And in hindsight, yeah, the answer is yes. It
Yes,
was
yes,
probably important to still cover it. So I think the same thing, yeah, still applies, right? And
yes.
especially when you have, these are all just building blocks. I mean, people 20, 30, 40 years ago were just as smart as now, right? They just had different constraints, right? They had different compute, um, different, opportunities. And so they developed very elegant solutions to very specific problems. And if these problems come now, actually, it's good to know how to solve these. Um, yeah, in particular, because you may want to develop a different architecture one day that actually uses different parts. For example, you want to stick a kernel maybe into a deep net, right? Certain people certainly tried it on multiple occasions, right? It can help.
Mhm. Yes, yes. I think it was the time when electronics was not that advanced, when you have stopped using neural network.
Yeah, yeah. Certainly, machine learning has a long history of being essentially following Moore's law, right? So
Hmm.
always constrained by compute. And initially, neural networks were, you know, not as efficient as for example, support vector machines. Like if you have a one-layer neural network, it tends to be better to actually use a neural network SVM. If you can do multiple layer deep nets, then they get an edge. But that's you have to do very fast matrix modification, and without a GPU, you couldn't really do that.
Hmm.
Um, so who knows? Like if Frank Rosenblatt would have had, when he invented the multi-layer perceptron, if he'd had some GPU, supercomputer, right? Who knows what he could have done, right? But that's just the way it is. And I guess ultimately you're right. But what won in the 2000s was basically, it turned out that SVMs are not very good at absorbing computing power, whereas neural networks are very good at utilizing computing power. So
Hmm.
it seems like that's what tends to be
Hmm.
winning, is whatever can use the compute that you have at the time.
Hmm.